Hello. On Wednesday, I want you to submit a draft of your final paper. In particular, I hope that you'll focus on the literature review component of that paper. This is going to be a short walkthrough of the paper, hopefully providing some additional guidance about the components and where you should find the materials for them. So to begin, you have this basic cover page. I won't spend any time on this. You don't need to agonize over coming up with a creative title. You just want something that describes your study. On the next page, you're going to put your abstract. I recommend that you wait on writing this. This should actually be the last thing that you write because you want this abstract to be an overview of the entirety of your final paper. This is the same way that researchers will wait to write the abstract until they've written their entire article, or they'll wait until they've written their entire chapter, because you need to know everything that you've done before you can tell the reader what to expect. The first real page of content will begin with your introduction. As you can see here, we're just looking for 1 to 2 paragraphs where you're introducing your topic. This is where you have an opportunity to talk about why this topic might be important, if there are any kind of clear examples or clear references that you can use in order to explain why this topic is so important. This can be an excellent place for those, but it doesn't need to be heavily cited. Statement of the problem is a subsection here. This is where you're going to kind of pull some of the language from recent researcher memos that you've read, where you're describing the specific issue that you're interested in. For example, many of you are curious about motivation and how that plays out in the classroom. In your initial introduction of those paragraphs 1 and 2, you'll be explaining just what motivation is and why it matters to classroom teaching. Then in the statement of the problem, you can say why there is still kind of a lack of understanding about what motivation is, or what specific issues you know about in classrooms that lead people to be interested in motivation. The second subsection under the introduction is the definition of terms. In your definition of terms, as it says here, you need to define important or confusing terms. You should not assume that something is understood. Again, using our motivation example, I would expect that all of you need to define just what you mean when you say intrinsic or extrinsic motivation. You do not have to include a citation here, but it is often useful to do that. It's more important to describe how you are using the term in the paper. This is a place where you get to determine that. It is your definition. Beneath the definition of terms, we see the research questions section. You've all written about your research questions. Remember to include that 1 paragraph explaining how you came to these questions. You can talk about your own anecdotal experience here. You can also talk about the process of forming your questions over the course of this semester. You do not need to include your hypotheses here. This is not an actual research study. This is just the proposal stage. This is where you're thinking about what those questions might be. So researcher positionality, is your opportunity to explain your position or stance relative to your research interest. For example, I think I've shared this in class. As someone who's interested in civic engagement, I need to be able to explain my own experiences with civic engagement and my own expectations of other people when it comes to civic engagement. For instance, because I come from a relatively affluent background, I've never had to worry that my voice would be heard by elected officials. There's always been some level of kind of access and communication there. That's not the case for everyone, and it's important that I account for that, that I acknowledge it, so that other people can understand where I'm coming from in the research, how where I'm coming from might differ from the people who I'm studying or the issues that I'm studying, and also how that might impact the way that I write about it and think about whatever the topic is. Regardless of whether or not you're doing a quantitative study or a qualitative study, you still need to explain your positionality. It does not need to be very long. This can be just 1 paragraph explaining your background. But what's really important is to think about how your particular experience with this topic that you have chosen may or may not differ from the experiences of others, particularly those who you think you want to use in your study. After you've introduced your topic, given us an understanding of your research questions and common terms, and explored kind of your prior experiences with the topic, it's time to get into the most important piece of this paper. This is the literature review and your opportunity to explain your theory. The problems on this page tell you, I think, exactly what's expected of you here. This is the place to focus your efforts. Particularly if you find yourself pressed for time when it comes to this first draft, this is where you want to spend your time. This is your opportunity to show us that you understand something about your topic. Not that you've experienced it or have professional experience with it, but that you understand it in the broader sense as it pertains to literature. This is where you use that literature to organize your understanding of the topic and to begin to demonstrate some sort of gap that you can address. As it says here, you want to provide an introduction to the literature review. We can get a brief overview of the ways in which you conducted your search. In particular, this is a great time to talk about any journals that you found were of great use to you, or any potential databases that were very useful for your work. If there are authors who recur throughout, this is an opportunity to introduce them. After you do this, you're going to explain your literature map and actually include the literature map here. A high-quality literature map will also be related to the theory that's guiding your understanding of the topic at hand. Please note that there is a specific way to caption the figure that you will include. You can find that information in your APA handbook. We'll then use that literature map to break your literature review into different sections. My guess is most of you will end up with 3 or 4 sections. If you have more than that, it tends to be a little thin within each section. Fewer than that, and there's not really any point to have it. When you introduce the section, you're going to give us a sense of what the section is about and why it gets its own. For example, if you have a lot of qualitative studies, you might use this as an opportunity to describe the type of qualitative methods that are generally used in the studies in that section. Then if section 2 is about quantitative studies, you can explain the types of quantitative methods that are generally used in there. After you've introduced the section, you can summarize and synthesize the literature. As we did with that second annotation, the goal will be trying to put those works, what those authors have written, into conversation with one another. Connecting words and segues between paragraphs can be very useful here. Words like similarly and conversely can actually do quite a lot to help the flow of this section. Once you've gone through all of the literature for a particular section, give us a summary paragraph. This is where you can tell us kind of what this section of literature tells us about your overall topic. After you do that, it's time to move into whatever you call section 2. As I said, you can have as many sections as you think are necessary. My suggestion to everyone is to really think about 3 to 4 as kind of a good target for that number. Again, this is the main place where you can focus your effort. In most practice, this ends up being 11 to 13 pages roughly. You don't need to use that as a target, but more as a guide. Fewer than 10 pages, you're probably not giving us enough information. More than 15 or 16 pages, you've probably gotten too in the weeds, and you need to step back and remember to keep in mind the key points of your literature. So that's the literature review section. After the literature is when you get into kind of the forward-thinking, more fun stuff. We've read all this literature, you're familiar with your topic, you know about it from your professional practice. This is your opportunity to tell us something new that you would like to do in order to help understand this topic further. This is where your gap comes into play. This is where you can begin to tell us all of these authors have examined this problem by doing this or that, but what they haven't considered is whatever it is that you think should be done. This could be something about the methods that are used. Perhaps they've done a lot of observations, but they've never interviewed people, or perhaps they've interviewed everyone, but they've never actually watched them before. It could be something about variables. Perhaps they've looked at one age group and ignored another. Or it could be something that you bring to the table that's new. This is your opportunity to come up with it. When I'm reading your proposed intervention, the main thing that I'm asking myself is, does this intervention follow from the literature review that you provided? Does it seem to fit within the commonly held approach to understanding your topic? Secondary to that, I'm going to ask myself whether or not this is a study that's actually realistic. Remember, the point of this paper is to set you up for the 695 class that you'll take as part of your program. You'll have 1 semester to carry out the study, so I'll be asking myself whether or not this seems like a feasible study to do within 1 semester. Whether or not it's a study that you'll actually be able to get access to. So you're not going to have the opportunity to interview 500 people, right? So you want to be kind of realistic about that. The final section of this paper is what's called the significance section. This is where you get to say, if hypothetically you've conducted this study, what's its potential significance in advancing our understanding? Neither of these sections need to be terribly long. Significance is generally 1 or 2 paragraphs. Your proposed intervention, depending on the level of detail that you have at this point, would be a page or 2, would probably be a reasonable target for that. Of course, you're going to include your references section. We'll be looking for APA formatting with no errors. We've had ample opportunity to become accustomed to that. And we're going to have at least 1 appendix. We've not talked about the IRP application here. This will be something that will come naturally out of your proposed intervention section. If you decide that you want to include other appendices here, some people feel compelled to include data sets or tables, other sorts of images, you can absolutely include other appendices, but you don't need to necessarily have anything besides the IRB application. That's an overview of the final paper that you'll submit. You should be able to pull lots of this information or lots of the sections from researcher memos and other work that we've conducted in the class to this point. The main place to focus your efforts is on that literature review section. My estimate is that the entire paper should be somewhere around 15 to 17 pages, although you will have variation, and you don't need to think of that as a specific target. Remember, what you're turning in on Wednesday is just a draft, and it will be reviewed as such. It's an opportunity for you to get feedback on the form and flow of your paper, as well as to get suggestions about the level of detail that you're including in your literature review. You will also have the opportunity to ask for specific feedback from both myself and your other peer reviews at that time. As always, if you have any questions, please let me know.